to a quiet journey through time. Tonight we will drift gently into the world of Stoic simplicity, not through grand battles or philosophical debates, but through the soft, repeating rhythms of daily life. We'll explore the morning rituals, the evening reflections, and the humble decisions of the Stoics. Let the soft echo of the past wrap around you, and if sleep comes, let it come. Marcus Aurelius, the philosopher king, did not wake to the clang of armor or the call of servants. His mornings began long before the palace stirred. In the deep stillness of dawn, he found his clearest thoughts. The air, cool and unmoving, carried no burden of the coming day. He would sit alone, sometimes in a small chamber facing east, watching the horizon shift from dark to faint lavender. With a simple wooden table before him and parchment laid flat, he would write, not speeches, not laws, but reflections. He did not intend these writings to be read by others. What we now treasure as the meditations were to him notes to the self, gentle reminders, anchors. He asked himself simple things. What is truly in my control today? Can I respond to hardship with gentleness? What does nature require of me? He reminded himself that he was mortal, that praise fades, that anger is a waste. Each thought was like a small pebble placed in the garden of his mind, not to build walls, but to form a path, a way forward. Marcus Aurelius believed mornings should not begin with anxiety or action, but with intention, a moment of clarity before the world's noise arrived. Sometimes he would drink warm water or wash his hands with scented oils, not out of luxury, but ritual, a cleansing of yesterday's burdens. He would dress simply, a linen tunic, sandals, perhaps a cloak in cooler weather. His servants, instructed not to speak unless necessary, moved quietly around him. He valued silence, not as absence but presence. It made room for thought. He would often walk along a quiet corridor before sunrise, a stretch of stone lit only by a dim lantern or the first threads of daylight. In this corridor he paced slowly, thoughtfully. At times he would pause and whisper a Stoic maxim to himself: "You have power over your mind, not outside events." Or, "The impediment to action advances action." He let these truths rest in his breath. In this space he was not emperor. He was simply Marcus, a man with worries, with aging bones, with a fragile heart. He found comfort not in wealth or splendor, but in returning to his principles every single morning. Each time the sun returned, it offered him a chance to realign with his values. He knew he would face anger, temptation, and sorrow. He knew he would be pulled by power and ego, but in the early light he could choose to begin again, gently. Even emperors need a quiet place to begin. His example reminds us each day can begin with a whisper. No matter how large our tasks, the soul can begin in stillness. In the writings of Seneca there is mention not of grand temples or fiery debates, but of cold water. Each morning the Stoic philosopher began his day with a simple act, washing his face in water drawn before sunrise. It was often cold, but this discomfort was the point. Seneca taught that the mind grows strong not in comfort, but in the gentle brushing up against what we fear. Cold water awakens the skin, it tightens the breath, it forces awareness, and it reminds us that life will not always be warm or pleasant, but we are capable of peace within it. He would dip his hands first, pause, then lift the water to his face, let it drip down the neck, a full moment. No rush, and then he would dry with a coarse cloth, the kind that scratches just enough to wake the senses. He might sit for a while afterward, simply breathing. This act, repeated day after day, became more than hygiene. It was philosophy in motion, a physical practice of acceptance. He once wrote, "We suffer more in imagination than in reality." And so by choosing a small discomfort, he inoculated himself against fear. Sometimes he would take it further, sleeping on a hard surface, wearing rough clothes, eating only bread, not out of punishment, but as a quiet experiment. What do I truly need? What do I cling to? Seneca encouraged others to practice poverty, not as a curse, but as a teacher. He would say, set aside a few days, dress in your worst clothes, eat the cheapest food. Ask yourself, is this the condition I so feared? By training himself in this way, Seneca reduced the power of fear over his mind. He made friends with simplicity. He saw through illusion, and when comfort returned, it was no longer his master. It was simply a guest. This rhythm, cold then warm, discomfort then calm, is nature's rhythm too. The seasons change, the winds shift, trees lose leaves only to grow again. Seneca's ritual teaches us we do not need to fight discomfort. We can greet it like an old friend, and with that, we grow gentle, not because life is easy, but because we are no longer afraid. As morning light touches the corner of a quiet room, there lies a simple robe, folded, waiting. The Stoics believed that even the act of dressing carried philosophical weight. Epictetus, once a slave and later a teacher of emperors, taught his students to treat daily actions, however mundane, as opportunities for reflection. Getting dressed wasn't just preparation for the world. It was a meditation, a conversation with the self. His cloak was wool, heavy in winter, coarse even in spring. But it wasn't chosen for fashion. It was chosen for function, for humility. When Epictetus laid out his garments each morning, he reminded himself that the body is not the soul, that outer appearance is transient. He would say, don't let your cloak speak louder than your actions. As he dressed, he moved with care. He would fold the fabric across his shoulders slowly, slip the sandals on evenly, touch the buckle with intention. Each step slowed down. He saw beauty in the plain, dignity in the humble, and purpose in repetition. He reminded his students that how we begin often shapes how we continue. So the robe was more than warmth. It was a soft shield against arrogance, a wearable reminder to live in accordance with nature, to be useful, not excessive, to be clean, but not vain. He would look in a mirror, not to admire, but to align, to ask, am I who I wish to be? Do my actions match my appearance? In the folds of fabric, Epictetus found honesty. In the simple belt knot, he found order. And with each soft rustle of cloth, he wrapped himself in intention. For the Stoic, dressing is not the act of putting on armor. It is the unveiling of the day's philosophy, to walk through life modestly, to leave space for the inner self to speak louder than the clothes, to be clothed not just in linen, but in clarity. And so as the day begins, wrapped in humble robes, the Stoic steps forward, ready not to be seen, but to see. The Stoics did not believe in indulgence. They believed in nourishment. To feed the body was not to entertain it, but to sustain it. Zeno of Citium, the founder of Stoicism, lived in modest circumstances for much of his life. And even when his influence grew, his meals remained the same. Bread, cheese, a few olives, maybe some figs. That was enough. Zeno believed hunger was a teacher, that by resisting elaborate meals, he sharpened his gratitude. He would chew slowly, savoring the texture of each crust, the saltiness of each olive, the quiet of each bite. He used his meal not as a break from thought, but as an extension of it. He would ask, "What does this food represent? What effort brought it to me? Am I thankful even for this simple bite?" Each breakfast was a lesson in humility. Each meal was a meditation on enoughness. Seneca would echo this in his writings. He said, "Do you ask what is the proper limit to wealth? It is, first, to have what is necessary, and second, to have what is enough." This applied not just to money, but to meals. The Stoics practiced moderation not to suffer, but to avoid becoming enslaved to pleasure. To find joy in simplicity was to become unshakable. As they ate, they often sat alone or in silence, not as punishment, but to be present, to hear the crunch of bread, to feel the olive pit on the tongue, to listen to the body's quiet signals. "I am full now. Thank you." And when they finished, they did not linger. They wiped the table, cleaned the cup, bowed internally to the day's first gift, sustenance, the bread and olive, a small meal for the body, but a great feast for the mind. When the midday sun warmed the earth, the Stoics did not retreat indoors. They walked, not for speed, not for distance, but for thought. A silent walk was a central ritual of many philosophers. Epictetus encouraged his students to move slowly through the porticos to let the sound of their steps echo their thoughts. Each step was an opportunity to listen, to reflect, to ask inwardly, "What stirred anger in me today? What part of me is still grasping for control?" Walking alone is not loneliness. It is presence. Seneca often walked in the colonnades behind his home. Surrounded by olive trees and stone paths, he would observe the way the sun filtered through leaves. He would let questions come and let answers go. He said, "Withdraw into yourself, especially when forced to be in a crowd." The Stoic walk is not escape. It is return to breath, return to slowness, return to the ever-steady ground beneath the feet. Some walked barefoot to feel the texture of earth, to remind the body you are part of nature, not above it. They would touch tree bark, notice bird song, feel the heat of a stone wall warmed by midday. Even the act of turning a corner became a lesson in impermanence. Every path, like every moment, was unrepeatable. They walked not to reach, but to be, to move gently with the world. And when the walk ended, they carried stillness back with them. At the height of the day, when shadows shrink and light spills over everything without hesitation, the Stoics paused. The noise of the world often builds by noon. Decisions are being made. Tempers flare, the stomach grumbles. But the Stoics, they sat still. Under a fig tree beside a fountain, on a stone bench warmed by sun, they chose slowness. For them, midday was not a signal to rush, but a sacred checkpoint. A breath, a pause, a return. Marcus Aurelius called it a pivot toward harmony. He would sit beneath the high arches of his portico and take account of his inner state. He asked himself, "Have I honored my responsibilities? Did I speak with care? Have I wandered from reason?" The questions weren't accusations, they were lanterns, soft lights to illuminate the corners of his day. Seneca, too, believed the mind must be watered regularly, like a garden. Midday was that watering. He often paused his writing and stood silently, eyes closed. He imagined the distance between thought and breath narrowing. He let go of tasks and simply existed, to sip water, to chew a fig, to stroke the surface of a ceramic cup and admire its imperfection. These were not luxuries. They were medicine. The Stoics didn't separate philosophy from life. Midday mindfulness was as much a part of their practice as logic or ethics. Even laborers in the fields knew this. A break from work, a shaded tree, a moment to eat and think, this too was Stoic. The sun above, impartial and ancient, reminded them of their smallness and their place in the order of things. They practiced seeing the day not as a burden, but as a shared rhythm with nature. The body needs food, the mind needs rest, the soul needs silence. Midday mindfulness is not elaborate. It is gentle, a glance at the sky, a stretch of the arms, a return to center. It is saying to yourself, this moment matters too. And so they sat and watched the shadow move slowly across the sundial. And with that shadow, they remembered, time is not to be conquered. Time is to be met. As twilight settled and birds quieted, the Stoics turned inward. Just as the body seeks warmth as the evening chill arrives, the mind seeks clarity before rest. Seneca practiced what he called evening examination. It was a time to review, not with harshness, but with softness. He would sit beside the same small desk each night, light a single candle, open a piece of parchment, and write. He asked, where did I act without purpose? Did I allow fear to guide me? Where was I kind? It was not a confession. It was a mirror. He did not scold himself, nor did he excuse himself. He wrote plainly, truthfully. And then, at the end of each letter to himself, he would often write, tomorrow, let it be better. This ritual became a rhythm, like breath, like sleep. To look at oneself each night without ego or shame was an act of courage. Marcus Aurelius, too, reflected each evening. He spoke of death, not fearfully, but peacefully. He reminded himself that each day might be his last, and thus it should be lived as if it were his first. They both believed the dusk carried a kind of honesty. When light dims, pretenses fade, the ego relaxes, and truth can speak. Some Stoics walked briefly before writing, to listen to the sounds of the evening, the distant hooves of horses, the rustle of vines, even the slowing of their own breath. This walk, this letter, this moment of dusk was the soul's opportunity to untangle itself and prepare for sleep, not as escape, but as surrender. Sleep was not separate from Stoicism. It was the final act of the day's theater, the moment when everything laid down, ambition, doubt, thought. Marcus Aurelius believed that sleep was practice. Practice for death, yes, but more so, practice for letting go. Each night he let the empire fall away. The debates, the laws, the letters unanswered, none of it followed him into slumber. He would lie on his back, hands on his chest, eyes toward the ceiling, and he would say to himself, I have done what I could. The rest is not mine. The Stoics did not fight sleep. They did not prolong the night with distractions. They welcomed the darkness. Seneca said, a mind that is in peace rests easily. To sleep well, they believed, was to live well, and so they prepared their rooms with care. A single blanket, a window slightly open, a breeze through the olive trees, sometimes a book at their side, but often nothing. They did not need dreams to be spectacular. They only wished for rest to be true. Sleep was a return to nature, to rhythm, to the still waters of the self. And when morning came, they rose, not urgently, but gently, grateful to begin again. Thank you for walking gently through the quiet rituals of the Stoics. We began with a man sitting in silence, a quiet emperor choosing the day's first words not for his empire, but for himself. We witnessed still water, the early hours, and the space between thoughts. And from that silence we moved gently into the unfolding shape of a Stoic day, through a cold splash of water and the coarse fabric of a robe, through a crust of bread and a worn sandal sole. You traveled, not across continents, but inward, into rhythm, into reflection. You walked in step with Marcus, with Seneca, with Epictetus. You breathed the air of fig trees. You listened to wind move through corridors older than memory. You watched the shadow slide across the sundial, not in urgency, but in understanding. And now, as night drapes softly across your room, we return to stillness. In every ritual, there was intention, not the kind that pushes or strains, but the kind that reminds. That brings us back to breath, back to now. You may feel the weight of your body against the bed, the warmth of your blanket, the softness of your own breath. Notice these things not to cling to them, but to honor them, to say, this too is part of living. The Stoics did not ask us to be rigid. They did not ask us to be cold. They asked us to be awake. Even as we sleep, that awareness hums quietly beneath the surface. They believed in rest, not as laziness, but as renewal. They believed in letting go, not as failure, but as wisdom. And so now, as your eyes grow heavier, you can release the day. Whatever it held, you do not need to carry it into the night. Whatever remains unfinished, let it remain. Whatever questions linger, let them settle like leaves floating gently to the bottom of a still pool. Seneca once said, "He who is brave is free." And perhaps the quietest kind of bravery is this: to lay down your burdens, to trust the dark, to sleep. You have done enough. Your soul has walked, listened, reflected. There is no next task, no final phrase to remember, no lesson to memorize, only this: you are here, and you are human. Let that be your meditation. The candle flickers now, its wax nearly gone. Like the day itself, it is burned steadily, slowly, until only the softest light remains. Outside, the wind has calmed. The fig leaves no longer sway. The olive branches have folded into still silhouettes against the moonlight. Above, the sky holds its constellations like a scroll of quiet wisdom. They do not shout. They do not rush. They simply shine. As you close your eyes, imagine Marcus Aurelius laying his head upon a simple cushion. Imagine Seneca folding away his parchment. Imagine Epictetus in a room with no gold, no guards, only thought and rest. And imagine yourself among them, not as a philosopher, not as a student, but as one who walks slowly with thoughtfulness. Your day has become a meditation, and your sleep can now become peace. Thank you for listening with care. Thank you for breathing with intention. Thank you for being still. Sleep well now, not as an escape, but as a return to your nature, a return to simplicity. The candle breathes one final glow and then goes out. Until next time.